Good afternoon and welcome to the live webcast from UHI's Management School. I'm Ian Forsyth and with me today is Trevor Colburn from HSBC. Great to have you with us, Trevor.
Yeah, morning.
We're going to be looking at how to work in partnership with your bank. There's been lots of stuff recently and we're all familiar, we've all heard the financial crash and all the stuff around about that. But today let's focus on the positive aspects of how do you actually build a relationship with your bank, and that's what we're going to talk about. What we'd really like to do though is get you to submit your own questions during this event. If you haven't been in one of our webcasts before, what you will see is on the left hand side of the video screen there's a chat box. You can type your questions into the chat box, hit enter, and I'll see them coming up on the screen in front of me here, and we'll put your questions to Trevor as well, so that it's not just questions that we've decided in advance. In fact, we're quite happy to bin all of our questions if you send us enough during the next 45 minutes or so. So please, really want to encourage you, make this yours, ask the questions you want to ask. This is a chance to put your questions to someone who's deeply immersed in the banking world. And not only that, local up in the Inverness area as well. So a good combination from a banking perspective. Trevor's currently the Senior Commercial Manager with HSBC in the north of Scotland. Interestingly, the Inverness branch of HSBC is the northernmost branch globally for the bank. We were just chatting before we came on air, apparently there was one in Russia, but it's not there anymore. So Inverness has reclaimed that crown as the most northern branch of HSBC. Trevor runs a portfolio of the largest business companies with turnover between, say, 10 and 30 million pounds. Typically, these are the clients that he's dealing with. But please, I'm sure, don't let that put you off. If you don't fall into that bracket and you're watching today, I'm sure Trevor will be quite happy to answer questions at pretty much any level.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So don't be put off by the 10 to 30 million thing. That might be an aspiration. It might be where you are already, but your questions are equally valid. So please do send your questions in. Let's just start though, Trevor. The financial crisis has impacted on banks. What are the key differences in terms of the way people have to deal with banks now?
I think clearly there are differences between how different banks operate, but if I could just suggest how we operate, I don't think we've changed the way we operate dramatically, but if in terms of the whole industry, I think the financial crisis has affected the industry in the most substantial way is in the requirements for banks to stick to very stringent, in some cases, capital ratios, which means that in terms of if they're lending money, then they have to set aside particular funds depending on how risky the loan is perceived. If it's a riskier loan, then they have to set aside more capital. Right. So clearly, from that side, that is why you're seeing a lot of stress and strain in the markets at the moment. With, I have to say, some banks stronger than other, based on what we see as their ability to hold capital. So in a way, yes, directly that would affect, I suspect, policies on certain in certain banks. But in terms of the basic principles of lending, as bankers being professionals within the profession, then certainly, I speak for my own organisation here, is that we would not have altered the way we look at any lending proposition. I would suggest that many of my fellow professionals in other banks just the same. Yeah. I think they've been affected by external conditions. Mm-hmm. So the holding of capital is the biggest one. The other aspect clearly that's affected it is in terms of some of the decisions some of the banks made, which means that that we're looking at an unprecedented situation where banks are making losses, and they have been. Some banks have been making losses, and others have had to have bailouts. And clearly, I suppose bigger picture-wise, that would impact perhaps internally on an organisation when a particular bank is being pulled left and right. Decisions are made. Yeah. Because of external factors rather than internal. Mm-hmm. But again, it comes down to as far as one-on-one with clients and as professionals working within the industry, I think we have to be quite careful that we stick to our guiding lending principles. Yeah. I don't think individuals, some of the decisions I suspect are taken out, or some of the things are affected by external factors that, unfortunately we can't, as bankers on the ground, we can't change. It may well, again, bigger picture-wise, I suppose, in terms of how it would reflect itself in customers and customers' reactions. The global banking crisis is unprecedented. Clearly, it still monopolises large parts of the media, and I suspect that, with all due respect to people who rely totally on the media to deliver a story, without perhaps delving into all the aspects, then you sometimes there can be an unbalanced view of the industry, I think. So, but again, the industry has a responsibility in promoting itself. And pointing.
Where do you feel that unbalance sort of lies? How does that manifest itself in your view?
The imbalance in views about the industry as a whole. How does it reflect itself?
Yeah.
Well, it certainly reflects itself in criticisms of banks, clearly. It reflects itself in criticisms in terms of decisions.
Yeah.
And very often, I suspect that decision making, if somebody has had a bad experience with a bank, for example, they will tell one other person, and I think, with the current mood out there, things do tend to get far larger. Whenever any business, forget it, whether it's a bank or not, whenever any business is faced with criticism, clearly it would always have the right to defend itself. And I think in terms of a bank, more often than not, there is a far deeper story. So, practically speaking, if somebody out there is influenced by the media, has a very passing knowledge of our industry, can develop an opinion based really on whatever a journalist or whatever a media choose to write.
So it's quite a complicated subject that can be oversimplified, and then that oversimplification can then lead to mismessages. Is that?
I believe that would be the case.
How do banks deal with that though? Because that must be quite tricky. If you've got a complicated message to get out there, people don't have time to spend understanding a complicated message.
Yes.
How do you deal with that?
Well, I think it's quite an interesting one for the banks, because as a whole, we've never been. This is unprecedented, so we've never been really faced with how to deal with it. Although we're very skilled in the advice we take in terms of our advertising, our PR, our promotion, and I think for a lot it's still a work in progress, because without any doubt there are very strong opinions held against the banks. Yeah. Alongside that, I think you can talk to many of our clients, for example, who would speak very highly of us and also of my competitors in the same way. So I think the banks have to do their best to understand who is out there, who is expressing these opinions, who is influencing opinions, and be honest and open about how they conduct themselves. Because I think honesty and openness is one thing that in terms of the banking industry has been challenged, and I think the more honest and open that you are with any partner, media person, customer, commentator, then it can be quite disarming, because then I think you get closer to the real truth.
Right. So, I mean,
you have to work on it.
Sounds like common sense, but a lot of the time these things get lost.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Just moving on, I mean, obviously there has been, very negative news about the economy, very negative news about businesses. How do you see it now, particularly in a Highland context? How do you see businesses coping now? Are things getting better? Are they?
I have to say that, the Highlands has not been unaffected by the economic crisis, but I rely obviously on my personal knowledge, my colleagues working in Scotland, and also commentary. I think the overriding view is that the crisis has not been as the crisis. I use that term. You've used it. Has not been as bad here in the Highlands. We have not reached a very high pitch. In other words, we would never have to fall very far. I think we have a level of economic activity, which means that we have smaller drops and maybe higher highs.
Yeah.
So that's not to say we're unaffected. I think the shortest answer to your question is that the successful businesses continue to be successful. They have to adopt different strategies because maybe their market is declining or their products are, being superseded by other competitors. It's quite mixed. I think overall one cannot avoid the fact that we are in an era of economic uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the level of activity has diminished.
Yeah.
But I think that the good companies accept that, and they would have had strategies because this is not the first recession that we've had. Certainly the established companies would have recognised these situations and are dealing with it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think overall it does remain tough.
Mm-hmm.
However, the successful there are good reasons why successful businesses continue to be successful,
mm-hmm.
and also why successful businesses who are less successful at the moment still manage to hang in there,
right.
on the basis that they make the right decisions. They might be a temporary decision of reducing costs, regrettable situations of making people redundant, for example, but the right sort of strategy to know that when the economic environment improves, which it certainly will do,
mm-hmm.
That they're ready to take advantage of the upside.
Be interesting just to explore, because I'm sure people would be interested to hear. You obviously come across lots of businesses, and you've very clearly identified the successful businesses from what you've said there. What do you think it is that really separates them from the rest? Well, perhaps nothing to do with banking, but from a general business perspective, I think it's an interesting thing to have a look at.
There are so many elements, so I'll just try and tease out the key ones. I think a business has to be very well managed.
Mm-hmm.
It has to have strong management. It has to have good products. It has to understand its market.
Mm-hmm.
It has to understand its customers. It has to be agile, mm-hmm. because one day one strategy can appear absolutely amazing, and they discover perhaps that a product has been superseded, as things tend to do these days with the technology moving. So they have to be agile. Mm-hmm. I think they certainly have to understand their customer base, so they have to be continually testing things like customer satisfaction. They have to be looking for constructive suggestions to improve from their client base. Mm-hmm. So that's where they have to be responded. I'm thinking of technology businesses, for example, one or two that I know, basically are interacting with their clients over a PC, and they know exactly to the minute, to the second, mm-hmm. what their clients think about their products. Right. And they're able to respond. Alongside that, you certainly need a very close handle on the financial aspects. You cannot make a successful business without knowing from day to day, from minute to minute, from hour to hour, ideally, how much money you're making, how much money you're losing, where you're making the money, where your cost centres are. So you do need a very strong financial backbone.
So you started off by saying, one of the first things you mentioned was well managed. It strikes me that almost everything you then talked about all kind of stems from it being well managed in the first place. So what do you think are the keys that make good managers?
The keys that make good managers, I think one of the best things is that clearly most businesses start off with a very keen entrepreneur, mm-hmm. who essentially would have sales skills and would know very much about his product. Now, the very clever guys would immediately recognise that as an entrepreneur, they have certain skills and they need to marry those with fellow managers. So one of the biggest things with any manager as a leader would be to recognise that he or she is only as strong as the team that gets around them. Right. The best thing I can say on that is that I recall Richard Branson said, lots of people asking what his secret is, and he's got many of them, I guess, but he said to me to hire the best people and let them get on with it. That sort of summarises. I mean, it's a great simplification. Yeah. But so that's giving power away, mm-hmm. from a manager or a leader is very, very important. But alongside that, still being head of that business. In other words, being able, if around the table discussion needed somebody to mediate and say, well, guys, this is where we're going. So to be very firm and say, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah.
But based on a very inclusive approach.
Right.
So that's one of the key aspects. The other thing I think, are you focusing on the aspects of leadership or management or a combination?
Yeah, I mean, what do you see as being the critical things? You obviously see so many.
Yeah.
So what are the things that jump out at you?
Vision, I think.
Uh-huh.
Certainly an ability to look into the future.
Yeah.
For example, we as a bank have produced a report which gives a vision of what the world would look like in 2050.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very large document. It's produced by an economist. Okay, if you're not very good at this sort of stuff, you'd have to sort of put your mind to it, but it's very valuable information.
Uh-huh.
So, and that enables you to have a vision. If you know what the population of Brazil is going to be in 10, 15 years, you know the full details of the rising middle class in China. So having that vision to look ahead, rather than as we have to do, we have to react quite quickly. So there's vision, I think. There's certainly strength of purpose, strength of character, motivation. Clearly, passion it's such a common word, but it is really only gifted to genuine passion. I think is gifted to quite a few people.
Right.
When you see it, you really know it.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, they absolutely believe in their product, their people.
Yeah.
And that alone allows them to, married to a very strong drive, it allows them to overcome anything that's really thrown at them.
Yeah.
Because when the chips are down, if you've got a team, inevitably you would look to a leader, I suspect, or a manager as a leader to carry you through that.
Mm-hmm.
So particularly in these particular difficult economic times, and you want to see somebody that is able to react.
Yeah.
In the best possible way, rather than throw their toys out of the pram, perhaps bury themselves away. I think in this term, sharing, I think, and coming back to what I said, into the ability to be inclusive.
Right.
There are lots of other things as well. I mean, but I think when you see strong management,
Yeah.
They have a breadth of vision, a breadth of information, a breadth of knowledge. They also have a really good breadth of networks and contacts.
Right. Right.
Not necessarily focused on their own business. They have an understanding of what's happening out there in the world in terms of financial. In other words, I think it's a very basic thing, but I think if you're not reading a newspaper, certainly the financial aspect of a newspaper every day or snippets of it, or getting a summary magazine once a week.
Yeah.
Alongside listening to the national and local news, then you're not attuned to what's going on out there, because any aspect can affect your business, your people. Mm-hmm. Finally, just on the people thing, I think it's so important to place the value in your people and spend time with your people, because at the end of the day, they're going to carry through your strategy. Mm-hmm. You can't do it on your own. So there is, and that is all about people skills.
Yeah.
And some people, it's inherent. Some people learn it. Often people within very close families, or people that have their own families, have an easier understanding of how that works.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interaction. Some people have to work at it, but it's so important.
Yeah.
You have to understand. You have to understand why certain people react in certain ways on a particular day, particular time of day, after a weekend, before a weekend. I think another example, again, I picked up Alex Ferguson, for example. This is a story that I've heard.
Yeah.
So I don't know the guy, but I understand that he has an intimate knowledge of everybody at Manchester United, from the cleaner, their family, upwards to the very top player, their family, their agents. So one of the things where he gets great respect is because he really understands and interacts well with the people around him.
Yeah, really takes an interest in people.
Quite.
Makes them feel part of something.
Quite.
Yeah. Okay, that is good. I mean, I suppose to some extent, I've kind of gone off topic a little, but it just seemed that it was worth exploring that. Yeah. What I would like to do, though, is just go back to the audience to say, come on, we would like to see your questions coming through, so let's see them coming in. If we come back on topic, because I've wandered a little, but the key things that businesses need to do to work more effectively with their bank, what should people be aware of in terms of, this is what I should be doing?
I think the key things is to recognise, as the subject of our talk here, is to recognise the true value of partnership. because I think it's probably been a little bit misunderstood in the current environment. Because I think sometimes people in difficulties tend to go into silos, and I think, as I've said this before, I think the more you share and the more you're open and the more you ask questions and the more you tell people about what you're doing and how successful otherwise you are. So in working in partnership with your bank, one of the key things is that you pay attention to the fact that we are trusted advisors and treat us as such. And include your accountant, your solicitor, anybody that touches your business that can be of help to you. So that's what.
Right.
Have I missed anything else?
No. I mean that's fine. I think that's okay. I suppose moving on and looking at newer businesses.
Okay.
Just starting.
So some pointers for how they would approach the bank,
how would they go about approaching the bank? If they've not had that experience before, it can be quite daunting.
All right. Well, I think the thing to do is, I think it all depends the type of personality you are.
Yeah.
I think if you're going to start a business at any level, I think you have to have a recognition that it's going to be quite a difficult task, and I think the more you can prepare, and I think the thing to do is certainly at the earliest opportunity talk to a banker,
right?
Particularly if finance is involved, but not necessarily. If there is no element of finance, but in terms of understanding and what a banker can do, he can signpost you. Mm-hmm. The key thing with a banker is that he can signpost you to other professionals.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter one iota if you don't feel that there is a requirement for the business to borrow.
Yeah.
Okay. At the end of the day, you're going to need a bank account anyway, whether you borrow or not. So at the very earliest stages, you're going to be talking to a banker. So the best way to approach a banker is to be passionate, to communicate properly, to tell him, certainly to plan the first meeting. Mm-hmm. As if he or she was promoting in the best way possible, but not hiding anything, but promoting their business. This is who I am, this is my idea, this is where I am at this stage. So we're not getting as far as producing a fully fledged business plan at this stage. Mm-hmm. Some people will approach their banks from day one with a fully fledged business plan, don't get me wrong. Yeah. And that's good as well, because that means they've taken the time to go to another professional, whether it be UHI, Business Gateway, or they've even accessed the net and done it under their own behalf. So I would recommend that they approached a bank at an early stage, because we can signpost them to other professionals and explain in much more detail why, for example, a business plan is appropriate, why planning in general is appropriate, why understanding the market is appropriate. It might well be that the best way of doing that is very often I'll meet businesses at professional events. So the person might have joined the Chamber of Commerce, they might have gone to an HIE seminar, they might have come to a UHI seminar. Mm-hmm. So what I would say is actively seek a banker out, rather than think, who do I approach? Well, I've heard that bankers are difficult, or accountants, that's too difficult, I'll go back and focus on. Identify that it is important that as starting up a business, important people you need to talk to at the early stage are your banker, your solicitor, your accountant. Okay. Yeah. There are others, but clearly that's focused on my arena at Doe, and you're asking me the question. So, and again, you can talk to other businesses and say, do you know a bank? Mm-hmm. Okay, tell me. Do you know the person that works? And tell me a bit about this bank. So if you do not want to pick up the phone to me directly, which I would encourage people to do, and other colleagues, do your research. Meet somebody at the chamber. Yeah. Understand, here's somebody who's just started up a business. Can you tell me who your banker is, who your accountant is, who is your assistant? Better still, approach that banker, accountant, solicitor at that function and say, hi, I'm such and such, I'm doing this. I really like some really good advice. Mm-hmm. Could we take some time? And I defy any professional not to grab that opportunity. Right. And anyway, the business person is testing that professional in their response. Yeah, because I was going to come on to that. I mean, the obvious thing, if someone's looking at choosing a bank, you would obviously, you're the people to come to. But if you're looking at from an objective perspective, what are the sorts of things that someone should be looking at? What are the sort in terms of
choosing a bank,
choosing a bank
from a business perspective?
Okay, one of the most important thing with any bank and with any banker that you're dealing with is the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that is about the one-to-one. Okay, if you're starting up in business, clearly, and a lot of people would use the internet these days, and they would look at everybody. They would look at every banker on the high street. They would, if they know the high street, they would recognise certain banks because of the location, and they might favour one or the other. I would suggest that what they need to do is draw up a short list of banks. Yeah. Go on the net, look at what those banks have got to offer. Look at their website. Don't rely on hearsay.
Mm-hmm.
Please don't rely on hearsay because it is about your personal judgment. So have a look on their websites. Look at we've got two, for example, a .co.uk and a .com. The .com gives you a global view, so you'll see things like values, principles. You'll see stock market ratings. Underneath that, you'll see a bit about our processes, our people.
Yeah.
Get a feel, okay, and then perhaps narrow it down. Yeah. Allied to what I've just said, if you've met one or two representatives of particular banks at various functions or what have you, so get a little short list, okay.
Yeah.
Then, in whatever way you do it, pick up the phone, email. I would always say pick up the phone, request a meeting. Then the next stage really is you've got knowledge of that bank.
Yeah.
You can go with no knowledge at all, but it's far easier because what a banker's also thinking is, what do you want from my bank? Right. What do you want me from individual? So then the next process starts, which is what we're doing here, which is interaction. Yeah. You as a business person would want to know with as safely as not that you could work with this person, you could work with this organisation. The way the processes and the people have been explained to me. Okay, but that sounds like it works. Yeah. Do not be frightened of asking difficult questions of a bank, saying I've heard this, I've heard that. Right. Tell me a bit about how your electronic banking works, for example. Why is, really, as you use the word interrogate, ask some difficult questions of your banker to say, look, if this happened to me as a client, what would you do? What would you? But the whole aim is you're doing what we're doing here. Right. You're seeing whether we can genuinely work together. You're also seeing how responsive the banker is, how agile he is, not only the banker, other professionals that you're going to meet with. Yeah. And then at the end of it, it's your judgment, right? Because you've got your shortlist, and I'm emphasising that you should see more than one. Yeah. You've got your shortlist, you've now narrowed it down, and then it may be one or two issues where we're better. What I would say is please avoid looking at us on the basis of price. Right. Now I can understand a business would do that, but if for example a business is marketing its own products, unless it's in the market of, we'll sell the cheapest, often people are looking for a premium price. And, if you're going to go for a good offering, you're not necessarily going to get what we would say the cheapest price. What I'm talking about in terms of price is the cost of how much it needs to process a check. Yeah. There is not an awful lot between us, but do not base your decision totally on price. It should be part of the decision. It's really it's much more about the relationship and the people and the processes behind that person who is running up. Can they deliver what you're looking for?
Just going back a bit in terms of, have a conversation with the bank. You said, ask questions. What do you think, if you like, the kind of... I know there will be specific questions that people will want to ask, but in general terms, what are the types of things that you should be sitting down and discussing with the bank manager?
Okay, the types of questions you should be asking are, for example, how do you view my industry at the moment? If you've got plans, can you tell me your views on my numbers? Can you tell me, do you understand my industry? Tell me what you know about my product. Tell me what about my markets. What do you think about the competition out there? That's really what you're trying to do is really clearly define whether the banker is understanding. Now, not every banker will know every industry. For example, there are some industries that are still new, but a banker should be honest and open and say to you, I know something about your industry, but then reverse it. Well, You tell me. I'd love to know. Tell me, because if any professional is honest and open, they would not know the nitty gritty. I have obviously some deep knowledge of some industries where I've had to do that.
Yeah.
But if I'm starting from scratch, I do my research.
Right.
So certainly you'd be one of the questions you'd be trying to find is what does the banker know about you as your industry. Another thing would be, again, if you're presenting to the banker, I've got this particular issue at the moment. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me what you do about that? I need your advice. Yeah. So it's getting the banker or any other professional to actually tell you what he or she would do.
To some extent, it's kind of testing their reaction to the questions as much as anything.
And alongside the obvious questions which always come out of, yes, okay, tell me a bit, and they don't often come out right at the outset. They might come at the end, because if you're starting a conversation in the way I'm suggesting, mm-hmm. it's a much better conversation, because from those questions, other things develop about the management of the business, as I said, the product, the industry. And then by that time, usually a customer and a banker are comfortable that we could do some business together. And then probably a latter part of that conversation, a customer might say, by the way, can you tell me a bit about your pricing? Yeah. And it's published normally, mm-hmm. but then we can cover it. Can you tell me a bit about your electronic banking product? Yes, okay. Yeah. So those are of course important aspects, because you want to know whether this bank is leading edge. Uh-huh. Does it have something that if you're dealing with as we often are these days, you're dealing with customers who have a very deep knowledge of technology, for example, and it's very important to them. How do you communicate with your bank? As a banker, how do you communicate with your clients? So you'll get into conversations about call centres, direct phones. Mm-hmm. Can I get through to you you should be asking how easy or otherwise is it to be able to talk to you. Right. Now in reality, customers, it's a mixture, because customers want to contact you in all sorts of ways. Mm-hmm. They like the flexibility. I think more often than not a customer would much prefer a one-to-one. Yeah. But at 12 o'clock at night, on Boxing Day, sometimes, it's better. You can get the information off of there. So in reality, it's a bit like ice cream. They'll have different flavours. So you tell them, well, there are various ways you can contact us. Right. So that's very important. Right. Because we know that, one of the issues certainly with our customers is that they appreciate communication and proper communication. Okay.
So bank managers don't work at midnight on Boxing Day. That's a bit of a revelation.
One of our subsidiaries does. I won't mention the name because that would be advertising, but probably people out there would know what I'm talking about. But
could you pick up on something else that you said earlier, because you mentioned figures, and the discussion of figures with businesses. I mean, business owners at all stages will typically be quite optimistic.
Yes.
And that can be either in terms of volume of sales or cash flow or a whole range of different issues, but they'll typically be optimistic. How do you help somebody to be more realistic? How, from your perspective, what can you as a banker do to help that?
Okay, it's an extremely good question. In a good way, you certainly want to be dealing with somebody who's optimistic. Entrepreneurs, if they're passionate, they're determined, and they love their product, mm-hmm. They're essentially optimistic people, self-starters. Okay, the realism comes in, I suppose, when really what you're getting into now is my assessment, because what you're suggesting is that, okay, you want that optimism to be tinged by reality. I think that's your question. Yeah. Okay, how do I do that? The way that I do that is asking open questions. Mm-hmm. The who, the why, the how, the what, the where. Because what that encourages is some deeper thought from that individual. Right. And more often than not, somebody is over optimistic about the numbers. People would have watched Dragon's Den, I'm sure, mm-hmm. very popular. Yeah. And it is repeated in reality, because the most difficult thing for any business to assess is their sales. Mm-hmm. And okay, let's use an example where somebody looks as if they're over optimistic on their sales. Clearly, you know the industry, mm-hmm. you know their competition, and you're seeing a number, and you look at the individual, because all the time you're thinking, first of all, your first question around the numbers, because that's the common thing about getting. The first question you should be asking is who has done the numbers.
Right.
Yeah. So you'd ask an open question, so say something of the nature. Well, I see that you've presented a business plan. That's great. Tell me a bit about the sales number. How did you get to that number? Mm-hmm. Listen to their response. Listening is clearly very important.
Right.
A lot of business owners are better at listening than others, particularly when they're very, very focused on getting a deal done. They're also very focused about the price. So you have to. It's almost like slowing them down. Uh-huh. Get them to slow down and actually, give us some back. So tell me, tell me a little bit more about your sales. Yeah. How did you and did you produce this plan or? Mm-hmm. Okay. Tell me a bit about the person that you worked with on producing that plan. Mm-hmm. What involvement did you have in the numbers? Because a lot of times we find that entrepreneurs push that away to their accountant to do.
Right.
And then maybe, and I know this sounds like an exaggeration, I have had a situation where the meeting's been arranged and the numbers have been delivered to them that morning, and really it's quite clear. But first of all, they've devolved the responsibility to produce the numbers, and that's a problem on its own. But even when they're presented in the morning, they haven't even looked at them. So, and you can disturb that quite quickly. So it's challenging them in a good way. Right. Open questions challenge people, and then you find how deep their understanding of the proposition really is. Mm-hmm. And you have to avoid sitting in judgment, because this is a very friendly thing, because we're very bankers can be very easily criticised for the way we deal with clients. Mm-hmm. And I try to be as disarming as possible when I'm doing this sort of questioning. One of my common phrases is that, by the way, I've never sat in the hot seat. What you're doing, I applaud you as a startup business. Mm-hmm. But what I can offer you is that I've seen many businesses at many stages, so I can offer you advice. So in other words, I'm not sitting here to judge you. Mm-hmm. Try to be disarming, because you don't want to be open to any criticism that you're being picky, you're being, this is a two-way conversation. Yeah. You want that client, even though you're wanting information which is possibly there, mm-hmm. that is being hidden, possibly for the best reasons. Yeah. But you need it because you can't go forward without it. Uh-huh. So you need to leave the customer with the best impression that you're being diligent, you're asking the right questions, and they're going away and thinking that was really worthwhile. Uh-huh. The best thing they can say to you is, "Thank you, Trevor. I didn't really realise. I had an understanding of that, but now we've spoken about it," and then you've made a connection. Right. That's your own test. What you don't want is a customer to go away and think, "My goodness, that was awful. That was an interrogation. Yeah. He told me this, he told me that, and what does he know? He's never run a business." Yeah. That sort of attitude. Yeah. It sounds simplistic, but you asked me how we do it, and that's really how you should be doing it.
What about for businesses who, at the moment, for whatever reason, don't feel particularly happy with the service that they're getting from their current bank? Okay. What would your advice be to them?
Somebody that's not happy with the service. Well,
I know that could cover a multitude of things, but there must be kind of some general pointers, maybe.
Well, they have, as any customer, I'm a customer, they have the right to complain. Mm-hmm. I use the word advising. What they should be doing, if they're upset with the service, they should be either talking to the person who's delivering it or their representative within that business, because they'll have helplines or talk lines about when things go wrong. So your first point of contact is always with the business to explain. To say to them, okay, we're looking at banks here. So I would expect that if you're unhappy with the service, assuming that you're a relationship manager, I'm a relationship manager, you should be addressing that to me straight away. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, if we're professional, we're doing it properly. Within HSBC, and I suspect all the other banks, we have extremely stringent ways of how we have to handle complaints, because we're all covered by the FSA. Mm-hmm. Okay. So. So you should not, because we've got that process in place, it is a process, and so therefore you use it. The FSA is there to protect people. Yeah. So if you're not providing the service, you've got the right to complain. or question. Use the word question at this stage because, you know, by questioning it, often it can be resolved very, very quickly.
Right.
And in fact, you know, in practically speaking, we as individuals on the front line always aim to get something resolved within 24 hours, if not sooner.
Yeah.
You know, so if you're unhappy with the service, you should question, complain, and make sure you get a satisfactory answer. It's as clear as that. I mean, there are other beyond that. If the bank is not delivering what you want, there are strategies in place. There is the FSA, and beyond that, then there's the ombudsman. There is a process.
Right.
There is a process, but you have very, very strong rights.
Okay.
And any bank worth its salt in this environment needs to be responsive. I mean, the data is published very frequently about customer complaints, and every bank takes those extremely seriously. You know, I think, you know, we fly in the face of a lot of criticism as an industry, but you know, you only have my word on this. Yeah. We're very sensitive to criticism over service. Yeah. And we also want if a customer is doing it in the right way, we want constructive feedback. Right. A long answer to your question, but the thing is that, you know, as a customer, they are in the number one position. They have all the rights. If you're not being served, they have their final choice. Yeah. If they're not satisfied, is the obvious one. Yeah. They have to move away from that provider. Yeah. And they have to look at an alternative.
But that's the ultimate sanction.
Exactly. Exactly.
Going back, we started off talking about, you know, how difficult people perceive it to be to borrow from banks now, and I'm talking specifically businesses here. Is it the case that banks are much more risk averse now? Is it just racing certainties that you'll tend to look at, or, you know, what kinds of things would you take into account?
Are banks more risk averse now? I think the principles of lending across banks have been there for many, many years, since I first took my exams back in the 70s. Are we more risk averse? I suspect in some situations we could be. Yeah. But that's because of possibly for external factors. We, as bankers, certainly as myself with our organisation, we always try to show absolute consistency. Okay. Right. Yeah. But you're asking for, it's a very general question about the industry, but I think in general as an industry, I suspect we are more risk averse because we are in difficult economic times. We in those difficult times we look much closer at numbers. It's how we react, I think, with our clients. We need to be understanding of our clients. Right. Okay. I would come back to my organisation. Our principles have not changed. So I would say that we have our risk aversity is at the same level. But as an industry, I suspect we're cautious. Right. It's probably I expect we're quite cautious in some of the decisions we're making across the industry at the moment. And a lot of them are because of external factors, because of this requirement to maintain, you know, higher. If you take on higher risk, then you have to set aside larger slugs of capital in case it goes wrong. So in a way, that could possibly affect the way, and you could interpret that as being more risk averse.
So from a customer's perspective, given that situation. What can you do? I know we've covered some of this, but just in sort of reasonably general but specific terms, what could you do to ease the concern about how much of a risk your particular borrowing requirements might be?
That's a very good question, because we are open for business, genuinely, and many banks are. And many banks, nobody is turning away quality business. And even in the current economic climate, every bank should be giving the proper clients the proper hearing. Can you just word the question again? Remind me of the question I said.
How as a customer can you give the bank more assurance that you're not a big risk?
All right.
If you like,
it would be a common question from a client, because a client would be asking if they believe you're risk averse or you're looking things at quite closely. They would say, well, what would happen if? It would be a what if question probably. What if my sales didn't hit the numbers? Yeah. What if my profitability? So in making what I would be doing is reassuring the client, that to mitigate a feeling of being risk averse, the most obvious way of doing that is to be open with your bank, to communicate your performance, to supply your banker with regular management information. And I'm seeing as I've got the client in front of me now and saying, at key moments in your business, successes, highs, lows, let me know what's happening.
Right.
Let's undertake a program of regular visiting. I say regular. Some businesses don't want some people, certainly early stages, would welcome regular visits. So that will be an agreed visit. So this is what I've been projecting to make a customer more risk adverse. The better I understand your business, the more open you are with me, the more understanding I can be, and the more help I can be in suggesting strategies. And even when, so in other words, if things did get tough, because we have this relationship, it's far easier for me to be supportive. Right. And that sometimes, more often than not, that does lift that feeling of goodness me, banks are up here, I'm down here. It's this, again, we're coming back to the subject of today, this partnership thing. That's what I'll be emphasising. The partnership.
So building a relationship.
Absolutely.
Just we're coming close to the end of time, but just to move to the kind of Inverness scenario, HSBC, most northerly branch, and all of that stuff, and not been in the area that long when compared with some of the other banks. How have things gone over the last few years in the Inverness area for you?
You're asking specifically about us?
Yes,
I can be okay. Well, I have to say extremely well. We are exceeding our targets in terms of acquiring new business. We are getting excellent customer feedback. More often than not, if we take on a new client, because that's essentially where most of our work is situated, encouraging people to switch, more often than not, we're asking clients whether they would join us in publicity and explaining to people that they have joined HSBC. So again, it's this partnership thing. I think I'm very positive today because I've done a very good deal. We've been here a long time. The reason that we're doing pretty well, I believe, is that we've invested a lot of time in developing relationships over a period here from zero, really. From partnering with the Chamber of Commerce, for example, with HIA, SCDI, all these organisations. A lot of hard groundwork put in letting people know who we are. I think word of mouth carries, hopefully. And again, we're open to constructive criticism, positive and otherwise. You'd expect to say this, wouldn't you? But I believe that we're getting some very positive views on HSBC from customers and the professional community in the way we conduct ourselves. But we are open all the time for constructive feedback. We want to maintain that. We want to get better. So we're very optimistic. We're very delighted to be here. We made the right decision. And working within the Highland community itself is excellent. I have to say, it didn't surprise me when I heard that this is the second. I think it's the highest place in the UK, the most popular place, or the happiest place, I think, the Highlands to live in the UK. Mainland. Didn't surprise me, having worked in London before. So again,
in your experience, what characterises the difference between, say, businesses here and in London?
Businesses here and in London.
What puts the smile on your face as you're talking about it?
Okay, well, you can tell I'm giving it away with a smile. What characterises? I think there's so many things. What I'm delighted about with dealing with Highland people is their resourcefulness, their very pleasant nature, their open nature, their approach to life. They'll work hard generally and play hard. They can be they can get to the nub of a thing. They can be very, very nice, but if something's on their mind, they'll be quite direct about it. I like that. But overall, I think it's the very, very pleasant, professional way they conduct themselves. It's the whole atmosphere of working up here, really. It's the people thing, really. It probably relates to remoteness of population. Life is a little bit less frenetic here than it is in London, waiting for the tube at London Bridge, and you can't get on one. You got to the It's a different. I think the interaction between people up here is excellent, and I think it just comes from a sense of well-being as well. From what I've just said from that recent survey, a sense of well-being up here. But yeah, I mean, essentially, because people are so often people are born and bred in remote communities, they have to be resourceful.
Yeah,
They have to be.
through.
They have to be self-starters. They have to be. They have to be resilient.
Well,
so that's
I'm
good.
conscious that we're getting very close to the end of time here. Time has flown by from our end. I just want to ask one final question. If there was one key lesson that businesses and banks can take from the whole financial crisis, what would that be? Just briefly, one key thing.
The banks?
What can we learn from it?
I think that banks have learned and will continue to learn how better to communicate more openly with their customers.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are doing it, but I don't think we tell enough people about it. So, you know, within the grounds of customer confidentiality, obviously,
Yeah.
to demonstrate more clearly what we're doing for local communities, because we're doing a lot of good work out there.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't shout about it. To explain that, you know, when things go wrong, we do our utmost to try and put them right.
Yeah.
So nobody's whiter than white.
Mhm.
So again, it's this openness. I think more things like this. I think certainly I would encourage, as I said, going back to when you said, what does a business do to start off? I would encourage businesses to network from an early stage,
Right.
to join organisations where they will meet bankers,
Yeah.
increase that interaction, between the business and the professional community, and break down whatever barriers. Most of them are just perceived barriers.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like whenever you meet, you have a perception about somebody's told you about it. I'm never going near that person. You meet them in the pub, you have a chat, and you think,
They're fine.
what a guy. So hopefully that answers.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a nice way to round off in the sense that, you know, we're talking about working in partnership with your bank.
Yeah.
A lot of what you've talked about has been about developing relationships. That seems to be the key.
Right.
That seems to be the crux of it all.
Sure.
But as ever, we have run out of time. So thanks very much for that, Trevor. That was a fascinating insight into some aspects of how the banking world works. And for me, certainly a more human face, I think, sometimes than you perceive. Which,
Well,
you know,
I've succeeded if that's the case. Thank you.
Absolutely. Just very quickly to say that the next live webcast from the Management School will be on the 14th of March with Alistair Dodds, who's the Chief Executive at Highland Council. I am conscious that I think there have been some technical difficulties with the questions, although as is always with the case, they've started to come through now, but we've run out of time, so huge apology for not being able to go over to some of the questions that come through from you, but I hope you have enjoyed the conversation with Trevor. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much and have a great afternoon.